The Economist.
Hello and welcome to The Intelligence from The Economist. I'm your host, Rosie Blore. Every weekday, we provide a fresh perspective on the events shaping your world. The US economy is having an amazing run at the moment, surpassing expectations. Why then are so many Americans glum about its prospects? And what does that mean for the election? And every year, thousands of Chinese migrants cross a dangerous jungle trying to reach America. Our correspondent followed one such group across Latin America to make a podcast series about their journey. First up, though, in the past few years, a number of celebrities have suddenly slimmed down.
Understand obesity is a disease, and so stop blaming yourself for something that's in your brain.
Oprah Winfrey, Whoopi Goldberg, Elon Musk all credit their transformation with medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Monjaro.
And one of the things that's helped me drop the weight is Monjaro.
These wonder drugs help people shed the pounds quickly, and they've now become widely available.
The weight loss drug, described as a game changer in the fight against obesity, is now available here in the UK.
Their technical name is GLP-1 receptor agonists, and you're going to keep hearing about them, because these drugs may do a lot more than help people get in shape.
Drugs similar to Ozempic were originally developed to treat diabetes.
Natasha Loder is our health editor.
But they also noticed in mice that it had an effect on their appetite. And so as firms refined these drugs, a new generation of drugs were developed, and they work not only in diabetes, but they also generate significant weight loss. But the story doesn't end there. Recent studies have shown that these drugs may actually have an impact on heart disease, kidney problems, and are being investigated for things like Alzheimer's, liver disease, and really a range of issues, including addiction.
If these drugs are helping people lose weight, it seems to make sense that they might then help for things like heart disease. Is that how they're working?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, by losing weight, you affect a host of other health conditions. But what's absolutely fascinating about these drugs is that that's actually not how they're achieving most of their benefits in heart disease, for example. There was a study of about 17,000 obese and overweight patients, and those that were taking these drugs had a reduction in serious heart events. And so we're talking like heart attacks, strokes. What they actually found was that these improvements to their heart health started long before patients lost a significant amount of weight. And the benefits were independent of weight loss. And so essentially what they think is happening is that these drugs are having a much more direct effect on the heart, on blood vessels, improving blood pressure, lowering inflammation.
Natasha, and it's an extraordinary list. And you mentioned Alzheimer's as well. Are there other things that these drugs could help with?
Yeah, the potential application of these drugs is actually remarkably broad. And so beyond dementia, there's liver disease and a sort of range of others, Parkinson's being looked into. There are some people who think that these drugs can help with addiction. I spoke with a doctor who was convinced that it helps her patients with alcoholism.
I mean, I have multiple patients who are on the verge of divorce. And then I put them on this medication. Not only do they lose weight, and I'm sure that makes them happier, but they stop drinking. Or it's not even that they stop drinking. They're able to drink moderately, which is honestly such a unique concept for patients who have been struggling for so long.
But remember, we're investigating at the moment. And so what we see as signals in early stage trials, observational studies, animal work, can sometimes vanish when we do the properly randomized controlled trials. What we can say, though, with the results we have in the bag, is that this drug class is already unlike any other we've seen in the breadth of its utility and applications, and that it's likely we're going to find more uses for these drugs. So it's just truly remarkable. It's as if we've stumbled on a sort of Swiss Army knife in drug form.
So Natasha, explain that to me, a Swiss Army knife in drug form. How does it actually work?
So I want to say, first of all, it's often the case with new drugs that we don't really understand how they work. But what we do know is that it is mimicking this particular hormone that the body produces and that it's unlocking a cascade of benefits throughout the body. We know receptors for this particular hormone are in the gut and in the pancreas, and they're helping us control blood sugar and weight there. But it also turns out that these receptors are scattered across some of the organs of the body, cells of the heart. And so for the cardiovascular benefits, what we know is that these GLP drugs are working directly on cells in the heart. They're activating protective mechanisms, reducing inflammation, clearing out cellular debris. But it also turns out that the hormone is working directly on the brain. And so GLP drugs are not only activating these molecular mechanisms in the reward centers of the brain, where, for example, they're reducing the appeal of food, but they're also triggering a sort of central anti-inflammatory switch, which kind of turns down inflammation across the entire body. And chronic inflammation is at the core of many conditions that beset human health.
Including aging, right? Could these actually be life extending?
Yeah, well, that's the speculation right now. And it's intriguing, really, because when we look at potential anti-aging drugs, what we find is quite a number of them happen to be diabetes drugs as well. One of them, called metformin, has long been mooted as an anti-aging drug. What I would say is that we already know that these drugs are life-saving and life-extending because, of course, they're saving people from dying of cardiovascular disease. And of course, there is the expectation that it will extend life by reducing obesity. But the question of whether you're doing something more fundamental and sort of slowing down this aging clock, that's something that's going to be fascinating to watch over the coming years.
So what is the future of these drugs, Natasha?
Well, look, the future of these drugs is going to be incredible. There are going to be new formulations that are more effective. They're going to try and eliminate some side effects. Some of the earlier drugs will come off patent, which might make them more affordable. We can expect oral versions as well instead of injections, and then perhaps versions that you don't need to inject as often. And what people are thinking about is that if the world isn't as fat, or the future is not one of increasing human fatness, whole industries may have to change the way that they operate. Fast food industries may have to focus more on healthier foods, smaller portions, because that's what people are going to want. Flying may be more efficient if people are not so heavy. Health and life insurance may have to adjust if we're living longer. I mean, there's a whole industry of people trying to essentially guess how big the GLP drug industry is going to be and the impacts on other sectors.
Absolutely fascinating stuff, Natasha. Thank you so much. And we can hear more on Babbage, is that correct?
Yeah, I've been talking to Alok Jha and we go in much further depth about these GLP drugs.
And that's out today. I'll be sure to listen. Thanks so much, Natasha.
Thanks, Rosie. It's always a pleasure.
Throughout the American presidential campaign, one issue has come up again and again.
Kamala Harris won't end the economic crisis. She will only make it worse. And why hasn't she?
Republicans hammer away at the idea that Biden's administration is useless at managing the economy.
Inflation has dropped faster here than the rest of the developed world. Unemployment is near record low levels.
Democrats present a far more positive story. But unfortunately for Kamala Harris, many voters just aren't buying it.
Tomorrow, America will publish its latest GDP or economic output figures for the third quarter.
Simon Rabinovich is our US economics editor.
They're expected once again to be very strong, around about 3% growth. That's a lot better than analysts were expecting a short while ago, a lot better than the analysts who thought that America might be in a recession by now. And you would think this would give a boost to Kamala Harris, but it's unclear that she actually will get one.
Simon, you're an economist. You know what the GDP figures mean. But what does this mean for the lived experience of individuals?
Well, it's true that for individuals, GDP might just seem a little bit too abstract, a little bit too distant from their everyday life. But the fact is, it does actually do a good job of explaining kind of more concrete factors that people experience day to day, from wages to prices. The Economist has built a model to forecast the election. And underlying that model, there are some economic indicators that help to shape the outcome. I think 5 in particular bear closer examination as America heads to its big vote. These are real incomes, that's income adjusted for inflation, real consumer spending, unemployment, inflation, of course, and consumer sentiment. And to varying degrees, all 5 of these are moving in a fairly positive direction for Harris.
So before we get to what it means for the Democrats, just dig into those figures a bit more for me.
I think it's important to start with personal income. And again, this is in real terms because, of course, inflation has been really high. But if you control for inflation, what you see is that incomes rose really strongly last year. This year, they're basically back to their pre-pandemic trend of about 2.5% growth. But what that means is that real incomes in America are quite a bit higher than what the pre-pandemic trend had indicated. They're expected to be about $51,000 per person. They're more than $52,000. So, that's a substantial difference that indicates that actually real incomes are doing fairly well. Beyond that, thanks in part to the fact that real incomes have been so strong, real consumer spending has also been remarkably resilient. It's growing at about 3% year on year. That's well above pre-pandemic averages. And that's a sign not just that consumers have money, but that also they're fairly confident in the health of the economy.
And what about the labour market and inflation, which were 2 of the markers that people were concerned about some months ago?
So these are 2 of the fundamental reasons why those predictions of doom, gloom, of recession have not come to pass. Number one, the labor market has remained remarkably solid. Over the past couple of months, the unemployment rate has ticked back down to about 4.1%. Judging by historic standards in America, that's a very, very low unemployment rate. It's also a lower unemployment rate than most other developed economies. Job growth has continued to surprise on the upside. And even more positively, if you look at labor force participation for prime age workers, that's people between the ages of 25 and 54, that's just shy of a record high. And the great news is that this has happened at the same time as inflation has continued to recede. Inflation, of course, is the main reason that people have been dissatisfied with Joe Biden's economy. But right now, if you look at it, it's basically back to the Federal Reserve's target of a 2% annual pace. So we're back to pre-pandemic inflation, even as we have an incredibly strong job market. This is a very, very robust, very resilient economy.
So as you say, that should all be good news for the Democrats, but I sense a but coming.
Well, there is a but, and it's one that you might have heard before, of course, which is that you have all of these economic figures that are quite strong, but if you actually ask Americans what they think about the economy, they're not so happy. So one indicator that economists follow very closely is a consumer sentiment survey by the University of Michigan, and that shows that, in fact, sentiment is quite a bit weaker, almost down to the level that you might expect if the economy were in a state of recession. And that's really one of the biggest data puzzles, is that despite the fact that you have this real economic strength, you ask consumers what they think and they appear to be a lot more glum. And this is one reason why pollsters would say that, yeah, sure, the real economic data is strong, but if you ask people about economic management and who will do a better job, Harris or Trump, this appears to be something that favors Trump over Harris, despite all of the apparently good economic news.
And why is sentiment so out of whack with the actual figures?
I think there's a couple of possible explanations. So the first is that the sentiment surveys are picking up a lot more than just kind of the pure reality of the growth data. Number one, there's extreme political polarization in America, which means that whatever is happening in the economy, roughly 50% of the electorate is primed to think that Kamala Harris, Joe Biden are doing a very bad job. In addition, of course, there's been very, very high inflation in the past couple of years, and economic studies indicate that when you've had a big run-up in inflation, even if the rate of price growth is back to normal, which is what has happened now, the fact that consumers are digesting big price increases in 2022, 2023 means they're still not all that happy. They still get sticker shock when they go to the grocery store. It kind of takes time to digest that inflation. So that would be an explanation saying that actually the sentiment surveys are picking up a real amount of discontent, and there are legitimate reasons for that. A separate explanation, which is more positive for Harris, is that maybe the sentiment surveys themselves are a little bit out of whack. I talked about the University of Michigan survey. In fact, they changed their methodology about half a year ago to go from phone-based polling to online-based polling. Economists who've looked at it say that this leads to a downward bias in their results, and that if you corrected for this downward bias, in fact, you'd find that consumer sentiment is bouncing up at around 3-year highs right now. So that's a much more positive story. And there are alternative indicators as well. For example, ones that look at sentiment based on social media that conclude that, in fact, over the past year, there's been a significant uptick in optimism. So 2 very different explanations. But if you take the latter explanation, that would suggest that there is a little bit of economic wind in Harris's sails at the moment.
We'll have to see what happens in just under a week. Simon, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Rosie.
We've just arrived in this beach town called Nicocli. It's on the coast of Colombia, and it's gorgeous.
Alice Su is our senior China correspondent and hosts Drum Tower, our sister podcast on China.
So we were just walking around here, and I was getting kind of nervous because I wasn't sure if we would find Chinese people. But after about 10 minutes of walking through the town, we came to this hotel. As we approached, I could see there was like this group of Chinese people just standing in a circle on the porch. I asked them, what are you doing here? And they're kind of like, what do you think we're doing? Obviously, we're walking together. And what they mean is that they're going together on this smuggling route up to the U.S.
This summer, I spent 3 months following Chinese migrants who had left their country in search of a better life in America. I first met them on the Caribbean coast in Colombia. In the past 2 years, Chinese migrants have become the fastest growing group attempting to cross the US-Mexico border. Last year, there were more than 37,000, nearly 10 times more than the year before and 50 times more than the year before that. Many of them do so by crossing the Darien Gap on a route that they call 走线, or walking the line. We made a special 4-part series on these migrants called Climbers for our podcast on China, Drum Tower. I wanted to meet the 走线 migrants to find out why they had left China and what they would face on their journey.
Alice, I've been listening to the series and it's completely brilliant. Congratulations. To those who haven't been listening, and they should, tell us how these migrants are making this perilous journey.
They leave China and then they fly all the way to South America. And until July this year, they were usually entering through Ecuador. That was the closest country to the United States that had visa-free entry for Chinese nationals. Since July, they've suspended that visa-free entry, so the numbers have gone down. But in the past 2 years, a lot of Chinese people were flying to Ecuador, making their way to Colombia, crossing the Darien Gap. They hire smugglers to take them across, and then they go through all of Central America, usually on buses. Then they reach Mexico, and then they have to get all the way up to the US border. So it's a really harrowing, difficult, and I should say life-threatening journey. And it's not just about crossing this lawless strip of jungle where they're facing hunger, disease, and dangerous wildlife. It's also that along the whole way, these migrants are putting themselves in the hands of smugglers, of criminal groups, and they're pushing against government policies of deterrence. In Mexico, for example, there are these government-run buses that collect migrants and keep transporting them back down south to the southern border. They're meeting all kinds of obstacles along the way.
And what did the Chinese people you met say about why they wanted to make it to America? Why were they prepared to go through such a dangerous journey?
For me, I started thinking immediately, are they political migrants or are they economic migrants? Are they fleeing Xi Jinping's China or are they leaving for economic reasons? And what I found was it was a mix of both. There's this young man we met named Wang Jun, and he was in a pro-democracy group in Shenzhen, the big city next to Hong Kong. And he spent 3 years in prison in China for subversion of state power. But even after he was released, he continued to live under surveillance and regular harassment. And he told us that he was starting to worry that he would either be detained again or lose his mind because he was so anxious.
I felt like my chest was tight and I couldn't breathe. I didn't know why. I went to the hospital and was tested for everything. All my results were normal. But this pain, it was something I could genuinely feel. Even now, I still sometimes feel it. Because I was so worried about what might happen to me.
And you said that some are going for economic reasons as well.
Everybody spoke about how China's economy is slowing down. They spoke about how they feel like there's a lack of social mobility. One of the migrants I met was this woman who was surnamed Huang. She had already migrated within China. She had left a village, gone to a town, gone to a city, gone to bigger and bigger places. But now she felt like there was nowhere left to climb higher within China. And so it was time for her to try something different.
In my hometown, the women my age are all farming or taking care of their children. That's it. Either that, or you are grinding away in a factory, right? Well, that's not what I want. I don't want to live day by day, with my face to the yellow earth and my back to the sky.
There's this one couple I met from southern China. They were on the road with their 2 kids, Tom and Angela, who were 10 and 12 years old. And Agan, the father, he couldn't really see very clearly. And I just thought, how are you going to survive the jungle? But they told me, they had made this decision because they wanted their children to have a freer future.
My husband and I, at our age, no matter how bad things get in China, we could ride it out. But I don't want my children to end up like us.
And what are the chances of a freer future? If they reach the American border, are they going to be allowed to stay?
It's not going to be so easy for these people, even if they do make it to America, to find a way to stay. I could plainly see that some people have much stronger, clearer asylum cases than others. There are also people who are embarking on this journey and planning to lie about their cases. And some people I met on the road told me that. They said, we're just going to exploit the system. So it's a really complex story, and that is also what makes it very fascinating and human. For the listeners, you can listen to the series. The final episode just came out yesterday, and go on the journey with us and meet these people, understand why they've made this choice to do what they're doing.
Alice, thank you so much, and congratulations on a really superb series.
Thank you, Rosie.
And a final note before we go. If you're quick, you can get 2 years of The Economist half price, with full access to Economist Podcast Plus included. That offer ends tomorrow. Subscribing helps make our journalism possible. Thank you. That's it for this episode of The Intelligence. Do let us know what you think of the show. You can get in touch at podcasts@economist.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow.